On this edition of the program, we try to get perspective on everything that has happened. The constitutional crisis, whether or not Democrats are going to take credit for a shutdown, and what it's like to follow the 2024 election from all around the world. It's all coming up.
The following is brought to you by Just Another Pilot.
Hello and welcome everybody to the Politics program for February 19th, 2025. Your old pal Justin Robert Young joining you from a particularly chilly Austin, Texas. Boy, howdy, that groundhog was not kidding when he said that there were going to be 6 more weeks of winter, because we got a dead freeze, the coldest of the season, coming here to Central Texas. But that does not dull our senses. That does not dull our ability to give you the best political analysis we possibly can. Which leads us to this. Wait, what? What just happened? To who? When? And it just flipped when it landed? A 13th kid with a 4th woman? Does that have anything to do with the other thing? You know, the one that just happened. Or maybe that was last week. The first month of Trump 47 has felt more like 47 weeks than it has 4, with a various barrage of executive orders, personnel decisions, and, let's say charitably, unconventional accounting procedures that have kicked ant piles, both foreign and domestic. And with all of that, as much of your reads on social media, Substack, or in your podcast feed are most likely very, very hyperbolic, or if you're on the right side of the aisle, particularly gleeful, I endeavor to ask this question for you every single day. What matters? On this episode of the show, we're going to talk to 2 people with very, very different levels of microscopic view into the political system. We have Gabe Fleischer, who writes the Wake Up to Politics newsletter. He is probably, even as a very fresh college graduate, forgotten more about political history or minutia than the average voter has ever cared to learn. And then on the opposite side of it, we have somebody that has intentionally disconnected himself from politics for the last year and has only now found himself back stateside. That's entrepreneur and co-creator of the Contender card game, John Teasdale. And that's fine, you say, Justin. I'm sure that I'm going to enjoy both of those conversations, but what about me? What does that give me as a scaffolding to understand what is happening right now? Well, if we're going to do that, then I want to dust off something that doesn't usually get brought out in the political realm, but I do think that it's worth it considering the breakneck pace of news. In 2013, WNYC's On the Media program put out a very helpful little infographic with 5 rules to understand breaking news. It is the Breaking News Consumer Handbook, and you've probably seen it when big events happen, like shootings or some kind of tragedy. But with all the headlines that are flying, I think it's worthwhile that we go through these 5 tenets and just kind of internalize them to this version of breaking news. Number 1, in the immediate aftermath, most news outlets will get it wrong. I feel like this is something that is incredibly important because there's a lot of information that is coming out now, and you owe it to yourself to slow down and wait few days, maybe even a week, before you get worked up about something. There are half-truths and gossip and rumor that are flying out of every orifice of Washington, D.C., and very often further context either illustrates this a little bit better or at least gives you context as to whether or not this is something that is indeed even newsworthy. Beyond that, don't you deserve the full complement of facts before you get led around by the nose by an outrage machine? I think you do. Number 2, don't trust anonymous sources. And with that, I'm going to go to a story that just broke as I was recording that I absolutely hate. From NBC News, as USA and Putin negotiate, intel shows he's not interested in a real peace deal, sources say. The sources are 4 anonymous sources. 2 are congressional aides and 2 are intel sources that I assume the congressional aides provided to NBC News. The article essentially states that while Vladimir Putin may well negotiate a peace deal with Donald Trump right now, he is not deterred from taking Ukraine long term. To which I say, da-doy. I'll leave it to the gumshoes to decide who benefits from leaking this and which intelligence agency or remnants of a department that may or may not state things would probably be the people that would be pushing this narrative. But what I want to really point out for you right now is that this is largely calorie-free news. This has no nutritional value. Unless you were of the belief that one of the most notorious strongmen in the world was going to apologize for invading Ukraine and say, pretty please don't slap me again. Of course, I will never go into Ukraine again. Then this doesn't matter at all. It doesn't tell you what the parameters of a peace deal would be. It doesn't tell you red lines that the Russian interests would not cross or Putin would not cross. It just says Vladimir Putin, by all estimations, appears to still be an authoritarian thug, which, yes, I don't think even most MAGA people would believe that they are not making a deal with a bad guy, a guy who, if given his druthers, would probably continue to reunite the Russian Federation. But this is the peace deal to be made. The end of war is not a morality play. If you want people to stop dying, certain decisions have to be made. But that becomes a headline. That leads NBC News. That may well lead the NBC Nightly News for all I know, because it's 4 anonymous sources. And again, number 2, don't trust anonymous sources. Number 3, don't trust stories that cite other media outlets as sources. This is more of a chum media article thing. So if you mostly get your information from places like Facebook, you are largely getting served things that are good at gaming Facebook, not necessarily good at giving you information. They are churning through as many words as possible so they can put it into as many channels as possible so they can make you click on it so you can get to a website where they tell you that Chumba Casino is the #1 social casino destination. Sign up today. That's really all they want to do. If they do care to get actual information, they are ripping it from somewhere else and saying that somewhere else reported it. Look, it's dubious if, again, what you want to do is keep a level head in this scenario, because you are being self-selected and served something that is only there for clickability. It is not there to make you smarter. Number 4 is more specific to shootings, which is there is almost never a second shooter. And so I'm going to adapt that a little bit and just say that indeed, our friend Occam does have a razor. And every once in a while, the simplest explanation for something is probably the one that is real. And while I know that there are many of our gumshoe friends that have had conspiracy theories, many of which have been yelled and screamed are absolutely ridiculous, that have come true. The COVID lab leak, Hunter Biden's laptop, and the list goes on and on. That doesn't mean that everything that gets surfaced, especially on social media, is exactly what it looks like. Especially when we talk about government spending. There are a lot of people out here right now that are digging through every federal expenditure report ever, and they are finding things that might at first blush look to be scandalous. Again, give it a few seconds, give it a few days to see whether or not some of this stuff actually holds up before you freak out about it and start retweeting. And number 5, pay attention to the language the media uses. We are getting reports, could mean anything. We are seeking confirmation, means they don't have confirmation. And the news outlet has learned means that it has a scoop or it is going out on a limb. go with the basics, right? Fundamental journalism. Fundamental journalism is a lead, a nut graph, and 3 on the record sources. It's just that simple. And if the lead isn't compelling, the nut graph doesn't tell you the entire bit of news that you are about to digest, that it is a roadmap to where you need to go, and then the 3 sources are not firsthand involved. They're not experts, quote unquote. They're not somebody from a think tank that's saying, well, actually, if you think about it. No. They're people that are involved. Then you should take it less seriously. In all honesty, there really isn't the amount of actual news that we have for the fire hose for delivery right now. There's a lot of gossip, there's a lot of innuendo, and there's a lot of hot takes. And that's before we get to people that are actually in the arena yelling at each other on social media. But very little of it is actual news with a capital N. To help us further sort that out, we have Gabe Fleischer of Wake Up to Politics. How you doing, buddy?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, Justin.
So initially I wanted to have you on to talk about whether or not we were in a constitutional crisis. And then I just checked in on your newsletter before we started recording just to see what the most recent thing that you'd written about. And it's kind of what I want to talk to you about because it's the general idea that nothing ever slows down anymore, that everything is going at 100 miles an hour. And I know from your perspective, as somebody who does try to offer a product that stays above the fray and a little bit beyond the hysteria of what is a very hysterical moment, what do you think matters? What is the thing that matters right now? What is the biggest story in politics?
I think that's a good question. I mean, I think to be honest, I think at my core it is, I think what you were originally going to talk about, like I think the idea of a potential constitutional crisis. I think if you look at what's going on right now, I think there's a lot of policy changes that are happening, and that's what you expect in an administration. Not that any of that doesn't matter. There are real consequences to a lot of these changes, but they are expected and normal, and what is going to happen when a new party takes power. To me, and I think it does speak to, I think, just how the Overton window has kind of shifted as Trump takes office, that not only are we talking about, not only do we have to be considering, like normally when we'd be sitting down talking to this administration, we'd be sorting through the normal policy changes that are happening, and there'd be some that are very consequential and some that aren't. To be frank, I think they are all kind of dwarfed by the possibility that you have a president who is tweeting, that he who,
quoting Napoleon Bonaparte in a way that is very troubling to those who believe that the president should be constrained by laws.
Exactly. So I do think those kind of threats to the separation of powers and to the rule of law, frankly, is the thing to me right now that strikes me as most important and just rises above all of that necessarily.
And that's the thing, is that I agree with you. And if you strip out the tweets, if you're just somebody who's not on social media, and even just go by what he has said publicly to people who have asked him questions about this, there was one element of the White House saying that they were going to defer enforcing a judge's ruling because there was another judge's ruling coming within 3 days, which is like, okay, we have the microscope on it, so it looks, not great, but also I don't know how different that would be in any other scenario where you had multiple different rulings on something that was happening within a week's time, because government, despite all appearances right now, does move slowly. It is odd because it is certainly the hare and not the tortoise these days, at least in certain respects. But it doesn't appear that we are in open defiance. However, the landscape, the clouds are seeded in the Marjorie Taylor Greene definition of the term, for something that could happen, at least by outside observations.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes this a really difficult story to cover right now, because I think you're exactly right. I think by all the evidence we have is that for the most part, all the court orders are being followed. The one exception being the case in Rhode Island with the funding freeze,
Yeah.
where a judge has quite explicitly not only paused the funding freeze, but also paused grants under the Inflation Reduction Act, under the Biden era infrastructure law. It is unclear to me exactly the extent to which that is being followed. I don't think that bubbles up to some constitutional crisis, because I do think that is fairly normal within, that if to the extent it's not being followed, I do think that'll be appealed and we'll figure that out. It sounds like the White House, first they said, okay, it's not the funding freeze, we're doing it under the IRA. Now they're saying, okay, it's not the IRA. We found other inconsistencies and we're pausing the grants because of that. I do think all of that will be sorted out. So I think you're right, but you can't not cover a president who is essentially declaring himself to be above the law, a vice president who's essentially saying federal judges cannot constrain executive power, when we have known, since the beginning of the republic that is the role of the federal judiciary, or part of the role of the federal judiciary, to check executive power. And so, it leaves us in this really unclear space where I think you're exactly right. If you read the Trump administration legal filings, not only are they complying with the court ruling, they're like bending over backwards to show we are complying. We are doing everything you're asking us to. In the funding freeze case, they're even like following the letter of the order, asking, can we please, pause FEMA money going to New York City? Like they're asking on a case-by-case basis, just as the judge, or at least as they have interpreted that the judge is making them do. The judge is saying, I'm not actually making you do that. You're overreading my order. But then at the same time, you have Elon Musk and J.D. Vance and Donald Trump, all to varying degrees, posting, threats of noncompliance. I think you're right. I think it kind of leaves us in this space where clearly not complying right now, but it still strikes me as a very important story to be. You're right, maybe we're watching with a microscope, but I think we kind of have to be, as long as the highest level officials in the executive branch are threatening to not comply with judicial orders. To me, no story kind of rises above, even just the threats of it.
Yeah. And I think that is a general problem, I would say, not only from a coverage perspective, but also for people that are trying to digest and understand the world around them, is like, there is an increasingly politicized judiciary. That has been something that has been, between Biden and Trump specifically, the probably the biggest thing that either Senate has bragged. This is not commentary. This is their own words that they have bragged about doing, are putting judges that they believe will interpret the law in their capacity on the bench. And so in some ways, this was always going to be where we landed, where there were decisions like this that were made. What's different, and this gets back to the thing that you wrote about today, is that we're not in a scenario which is more traditional, where a upstart or a differently thinking presidency or executive branch are testing the gates, or like have picked one a soft spot for which they are going to try to change the way the government operates. We are in a all and every a scenario where, especially when it comes to clawing funding back, that's just the reality. We're in something that, like, you are going to get a lot of orders, because some of this stuff, it was designed to go to the Supreme Court. Like birthright citizenship was designed to go to the Supreme Court. Like, for people who are like, oh, well, like a judge stopped it. Yes, that was, nobody involved in that process ever thought that this was, Pat Buchanan said this needs to go to the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court needs to rule on it. No lower court is going to be able to do it. But some of the other stuff, the funding free stuff, the firing stuff, like, that's, I don't know. I mean, who knows where it lands, but also it's very, very hard to sort out because all of these are very different.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right on that. And I think, and it is, and some of them are very hard to predict how the Supreme Court will end up ruling. I think the birthright citizenship, you're exactly right, I think was absolutely designed to go to the Supreme Court. I think, frankly, unclear to me whether, I think, clearly there will be at least 2 votes, I think, to probably, or I won't even say that. I'll say, I think it's unclear where the conservative Supreme Court will end up in that one. It seems like the fastest case that will end up at the court is going to be this question of whether the president can fire independent agency heads. I think that's one where you will see a lot more sympathy from the court, where it is a lot more clear. I think if you just look at it from a common sense perspective, these are executive branch officials. We generally acknowledge that the president has dominion over the executive branch. I think a lot more legal experts, judges, and just regular people looking at the case will have more sympathy to a president who is trying to fire people within his own branch. That's going to be an easier case. But the more these kind of wind through the courts, you have questions like birthright citizenship, questions like impoundment that haven't been tested. I mean, birthright citizenship's case for centuries. When you talk about impoundment, questions that have been tested for decades. I mean, you have truly kind of novel legal questions that no president has really tried to push the boundary on. And you're right. There's kind of always been kind of fringe conservative activists, calling for a lot of these cases. A lot of these cases kind of fall under a kind of unitary executive theory that obviously has kind of percolated within kind of the conservative legal movement for a long time. But obviously Donald Trump is not someone who came up in the Federalist Society by any means.
No,
he's kind of percolated through that movement, but they finally found someone who's kind of willing to really test a lot of these theories and truly see how far the judicial branch essentially is going to let the executive branch kind of assert power. And I think a lot of these cases, it is kind of hard to see where they'll fall down. And a lot of them will be kind of taken very differently depending on the exact kind of legal details and context of the case.
Here's the biggest question that I have with all of this is is this a local DC story? Is this something that really trickles out to the rest of the country? Because I don't know where between inflation and Donald Trump said that Liz Cheney should be shot, this lands. One being entirely paid attention to by people who are hyper plugged in and doesn't matter at all in the electorate, and one being a thing that wrecks a presidency like it did for Joe Biden. My guess is that it's probably closer to the version where it's only people who are very, very read in on all of this that are the most passionate about it. I don't know how much the average voter has sympathy for a government employee, getting fired, but I don't know.
I think it depends what type of government employee you're talking about. If you're talking about like the head of the NLRB, do I think that a case of whether the president can fire, let's say, an inspector general or someone at the EEOC or NLRB, is that going to cause a lot of popular, sympathy or attention? I don't think so. But you look at what's gone on this past weekend, where the administration is basically trying to fire all the probationary employees of the government. These are hundreds of thousands of employees who either have been working for the government for less than 2 years. For your first 2 years, you always have to go through kind of this probationary period. Or maybe they've just been in the particular job they've been in for less than 2 years. Some of these people have been in the government for decades, but just have moved jobs or moved agencies and are in the probationary period in their specific job. I think a lot of those cases are going to be a lot more sympathetic because a lot of them are not people, to answer your question whether it's only a DC issue, these are people stationed all across the country. These are, a lot of them, these are people at the VA, at HHS. A lot of these people are veterans themselves because the federal government gives priority to veterans when they're hiring, especially at the VA. So you have a lot of people who are much, I don't think whatever people's general vision of a government bureaucrat might be kind of, in an ivory tower here in DC, that is not the case for a lot of these people who are working for not very high pay, doing jobs that I think a lot of people really do count on across the country. So I think, those are going to be a lot more sympathetic stories, but they're also performing, in some cases, fairly essential services. And so I think, you're already seeing things like, kind of the plane crashes going on. I'm not saying that they have any link to any of the firings that have already happened at FAA or Department of Transportation. We don't have any evidence of that. But will it be possible for Democrats to paint a narrative whereby you hold up on one hand a lot of plane crashes and then on the other hand a lot of firings at the Federal Aviation Administration? I think that will be able to be done.
That is certainly the hope of one recent Michigan native who wants to run for Senate and used to be the Secretary of Transportation.
Exactly. And I think you see the Trump administration, they're already beginning to regret some of the firings they've made. You see it, the Nuclear Safety Administration.
Yes.
They've trying to rehire some of the people, and they're struggling to do so. God forbid we have some sort of nuclear accident in the next few months. That will absolutely be linked to the sort of chaos they've had at that agency. So I think it's a case-by-case thing. I think a lot of these employees, you're exactly right, will inspire no sympathy. Others, I think, are much going to be seen as much more kind of normal, regular people that people will kind of see themselves in, see their neighbors in, and a lot of them will also be doing services that it will be linked, it will be able to link to kind of any kind of crisis or disaster that happens in the next few months. It will be pointed to that the Trump administration tried to gut a lot of the agencies that have oversight over, a lot of these kind of essential services that are happening across the country.
What's remarkable to me is almost one for one the comparisons to tech firings. And I've been around the tech industry for a while. I have seen my wife got fired a year ago, like almost to the beat. This has acted like a tech firing, down to the proposed buyout. So you can buy yourself out. The fact that everything goes out on the same day, and sometimes there's awkward things like the name isn't there, so it's just brackets, like, so you're getting fired in a mail merge accident or a spreadsheet merge accident. And then the fact that there's overbroad cuts, and then somebody realizes, oh, wait, hold on, why isn't this working anymore? We got to go hire these people back. Like, that happens all the time. That is something that happens constantly in the tech world. And that's really where I don't know where the public is going to wind up coming down, is that obviously in general, historically, polling has suggested that the American people believe that the federal government's workforce can be less, and that the government does not need to be bigger, that in fact it should be smaller. In all but, like, I think 2 times in the last 30 years, that has been a pretty popular position in American polling. So how protected, where is the line of, like, okay, you lost your job, that sucks. It sucks that you lost your job. If I now can't get something done in the government, I'm upset. But then again, what were their expectations of getting things done with the government before? True. Is it like, oh, well, I couldn't get something done? Great, add it to the list of things that I couldn't get something done with the government with the exact staff that they wanted.
I mean, I think similar to what we're talking about with the birthright citizenship thing, where it's kind of, this is a debate that's gone on for decades. Then finally you have a president in Donald Trump who's kind of willing to bring it to the fore. I mean, obviously, size of government debates have been animating American politics since there's been American politics. That's the very crux of, our political discussions, going back to Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton. But now I think you do finally have, you have a president, and then you also have Elon Musk, who's literally kind of going in and kind of testing some of these theories. Sure, we can slash, X% of the government workforce. Sure, we can go in and, kind of stop all federal grants and loans. And I think the American people are about to really kind of see, okay, this is what American government is. And maybe they will find themselves to have been just as displeased by the government as they've always felt they will be. Or they will find that a lot of kind of under the radar, services and kind of organizations they rely on and things like that were actually relying on government funding that they didn't even realize. And I think a revealing thing here is you've started to see, especially in the last few days, you start to see Republican lawmakers starting to push back against some of kind of the DOGE cuts and against some of what Musk is doing. And why are they doing that? Because it's starting to impact their own constituents. And you see Katie Britt pushing back against, what the administration is trying to do with NIH cuts, because Alabama, all states, Republican states and Democratic states, have universities that are trying to, study, life-threatening diseases and other things like that, and need that money from the NIH. You see, Jerry Moran in Kansas is pushing back against, there's a program that allows kind of farmers, part of USAID, to allow farmers to sell their crops to, foreign countries to kind of both help the countries abroad. And that's why, Musk cut it, because they're not interested in doing that. But it also helps, farmers in Jerry Moran's Kansas who rely on that program to be able to sell their crops there. And so I think, maybe a lot of those people in Alabama or Kansas, they might not think very highly of the federal government and might be all on board with shrinking the size of government. But potentially you'll see that right up until it cuts, the research budget at the University of Alabama, or it cuts, their crop, where they're able to send their crops. And so I think, once again, it's kind of taking something that's been theory for a long time. Not that there haven't been presidents that have tried to grow or shrink the federal bureaucracy, but not to the extent that we're
No,
seeing.
nothing like this has happened.
And so I think
and
where we're
that's
seeing theory become practice, and we're about to see whether that polling of people who, say they're willing to have foreign aid cut and willing to kind of shrink the federal bureaucracy, we're about to see whether people are actually as comfortable with the consequences of those actions as they are with the theory of it.
a foreign aid cut, I think, is probably more of a clearer win than anything that would impact constituent services. Because foreign aid is something that is like that has a lot of different versions to it. And also specifically with USAID, the most comical examples of the I don't want waste to some, frivolous to others, whatever. They're colorful and they will always drown out any kind of argument that it's like all right, well, PEPFAR. Okay, so fund PEPFAR. It's like they would rather go by the any cause that does get some kind of sympathy. Fine, fund that. Do that under the State Department, and everything else that'll be that. But anything, I think you're right. Anything with constituent services, that's something that's going to be a big issue. And really, to my mind, the scenario isn't whether or not people are upset by these cuts or they are delighted by these cuts. It's whether or not they are upset by these cuts or they don't notice at all. Mm-hmm. And at that point, if they don't notice at all, then this is still what it needs to be for Trump, which is essentially he has to have a message and a narrative for the American people when it comes to kitchen table issues like inflation by the summer. I kind of compare it to where Biden was at with COVID. Mm-hmm. Like Biden came in, nobody really blamed Biden's handling of COVID until Independence Day 2021. He declared independence from COVID, and then Omicron hit within 12 hours. And it was like, oh, you might not be the magic man with his steady hand on the wheel when it comes to this. I think that's kind of where Trump is with inflation. That no matter, all of this is window dressing. If people are upset, if grants are cut, if there's a farmers lobby that's upset that they're not going to get the exact same program that they had before, that is what it is. If gas is high and grocery prices are still going up, that's really where I think his first term lives or dies.
I think that's probably true. I think it is interesting to note when you take the Biden example, ultimately what, the proximate thing that really kind of ended his honeymoon and kind of sunk his approval.
Well, that was Afghanistan. Yeah.
Right. Was the Afghanistan withdrawal. And I think what's interesting about that, and I mean, it's kind of this interesting example of he was kind of riding high and then it went down and then it just parked there for, the rest of the term. And it was this kind of thing where it was this kind of odd thing because it's not like American people were still kind of thinking of the Afghanistan withdrawal, I don't think, for the most part. No. And yet kind of opinions of him never recovered. And I do think a big part of that was because, Joe Biden, just like he promised, came in promising to kind of end COVID, came in promising, stability and order. Yes. And then suddenly it was this first kind of real example of chaos and of disorder. And it was clearly I thought you were the guys that were supposed to know what you were doing. And suddenly, it just went terribly. And they did not seem to know what they were doing. And with Trump, it's just harder. I think most political observers kind of do expect eventually he'll reach a point like that too, where kind of the honeymoon will end and his approval ratings, which aren't starting as high as Biden, will eventually kind of go down. But it's not going to be. I mean, it's not going to be for something like that because I think the expectation is already for Trump that everything is chaotic and that there's always going to be disorder. So it's not going to be like that. I do think. I think you're right that the expectation for Trump is that he'll bring down prices, but I don't know. I do think one thing that is clearly borne out by the experience of the last few years is that I think economic, a president's approval rating is clearly linked to inflation and to their handling of the economy. But I think if you kind of take a macro view of the last few decades, even more than that, and you especially look at how Barack Obama was able to be reelected, I think you think more it's linked to how the president is able to communicate the economy. And so I think that's more of an open question. I think if Donald Trump is able to communicate such that people think the economy is going so much better than maybe it actually is, maybe that isn't something that sinks his approval rating. I think it's kind of a harder with Trump. It's always, this kind of Teflon Don dynamic where it is kind of harder
Yeah.
to know what the thing is that could ultimately puncture him because his public image is already so different than like a Joe Biden's that it's so easy to puncture a kind of veneer of stability, the first unstable thing. But with Donald Trump, people expect kind of unpredictability. I think to some extent people even expect he won't keep his promises. They expect a lot of kind of chaos and things like that. So I think it's harder to know exactly what will kind of ultimately kind of be his downfall for that reason.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the big thing that would like be a major issue for him if there was like a gigantic stock market collapse or there was like some kind of big economic event that totally tracked things down. That would be something that's just hard to recover. It's hard to message your way out of it. You know, you can blame and point fingers, but ultimately this happened under your watch. It's funny. I was thinking about the Afghanistan withdrawal yesterday because one of the big messages from the Democratic side of this, which is somewhere between lost and flailing, like a dog barking when a UPS truck drives outside, is that like, oh, well, this is what happens when move fast and break things, comes to government. This is what's happening. And it's like, well, steady hand on the wheel got people falling off the landing gear of planes in Afghanistan. So I don't know where the American public is like, okay, well, this is a major problem. That's really the biggest thing that I've been surprised that his approval rating has stayed above 50. Now, granted, that's not it feels more impressive because it feels like this month has been 6 months. And if his approval rating is post 50 or above 50 at 6 months, I do think it will be legitimately impressive. But he's never cruised above 50 ever for any period of time. So for him to maintain it for a month, especially with all this noise around him, is, I think, notable. I'm going to put it in notable, a Post-it note, maybe pencil, not pen.
I'll say impressive. I mean, I think it's impressive. I think Donald Trump, you see a lot of people, I saw a headline the other day, Donald Trump, I think it was the Washington Post, like, the only president Donald Trump's approval ratings beating is himself in 2017.
Yeah.
And that's true, that, in, terms of a presidential honeymoon, this is a low approval rating. But in Trump-adjusted terms, the fact that a majority of the country is continuing to approve of him is really impressive. When you go back to 2017, and you just go back to the last 7 years of how divisive of a figure this has been, and then you add in the fact that he is so much more than in 2017, changing almost every, going into almost every arm of the government and shaking things up in this hugely, transformative and consequential way, and you note that people are, seem mostly okay with it. I do think that is notable. I think there is the question how long it will last. I think what you said earlier is the right point. That, if ultimately he makes all these changes and people don't notice, even if they don't particularly approve of it, if they don't notice, then he's won. Because the gamble, just like Elon Musk's gamble, at Twitter, is that, a lot of this workforce is just superfluous and we can just cut all the fat and no one will notice and we won't need it. And if that ends up being the case, then I think you're right. Then he'll have won. If a few months from now, people do start noticing changes to the services they're used to receiving, if people do start feeling like there's money that they thought they'd be getting, that they don't, then that could change. I think also we have to remember, so far we've only seen Donald Trump kind of working in kind of the arena of executive action. Eventually they're going to start working on legislation. I'm not so sure that his reconciliation package is going to be all that popular. Historically, when Republicans start talking about cutting entitlement programs,
Medicaid cuts,
that is exactly when they start to lose their popularity. So I think all of this is somewhat provisional until people start, or we won't know fully how people are feeling about the administration until they start feeling the cuts of it, or until they start feeling kind of the cuts, and until kind of we actually see the response to the legislative agenda, which is going to be much more consequential than anything he's doing. The cuts, while large relative to what other presidents tried to do, are still fairly small within the kind of size of the federal budget. But I think you're right. For now, the fact that he's holding together most of his popularity, and that doesn't seem to me that there is so much popular backlash yet, despite Democrats' attempts to kind of gin up all these kind of protests
that are at like 11. Like they are. I don't know how much louder you can get than out doing big gaggle protests by all of your congressional delegations every single day. Like I don't know where else
those have not resonated so far. So
I mean, if anything, they have been probably spectacular boomerang to the face style backfires. And I do think part of understanding that polling to me is understanding just how well defined Donald Trump is, and the fact that he is, there's 40% of this country that believes the president of the United States is something among the basket of Russian agent, rapist, criminal, or just incompetent. They just hate him, right? So that's 40% of the country right there. Like, dead on, that's never changing, hard baked. They will go into the ground believing that he was one of those things. So you're really playing with 60% of the country. And right now he has like 51 to 56% of it, based on the current polling.
And another half, if you take the 60, 40 of the 60, think he's perfect, will never.
He's perfect. Yeah, he's
never moving. So it's really kind of 20 in the middle. And I think to your point earlier, I think it is worth noting a lot of independents, especially, are really big. If you look at polls asking about size of government, asking about government reform, a lot of people, especially independents, are really dissatisfied with the state of government, with the state of the political system, do want someone to go in and really enact large-scale political change. I mean, that is clearly part of why Donald Trump managed to be elected twice. I think a lot of that...
Part of the reason why Obama was elected. Part of the reason why Clinton was elected.
Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton. It's a very persistent theme throughout American politics, but it's clearly, I do think it's really at a high point right now.
Oh, yeah.
It's at a high point among young people. And so I think there's a lot of that 20% in the middle. I think what you see in that polling right now is this willingness to say, we elected him to kind of go in there and be this kind of wrecking ball to really kind of, we are not happy with the status quo. We are not happy with how things are. And we're willing to kind of let him go in and do that. And so I think that you see that willingness on behalf of that kind of, pretty small kind of segment in the middle that is still clearly with him. And so then I do think approval ratings have kind of lost a bit of their, usefulness for that reason of you have these two kind of factions on either end that clearly are not movable at all. So we'll see, in the next few months, whether that kind of segment in the middle, now they're kind of getting the wrecking ball that a lot of them have said they wanted, and we'll see whether it's as good as they thought it would be or whether it actually ends up, with pretty damaging consequences. I think, we'll see. Clearly, Trump and Musk's bet is that there's a lot of fat, and that a lot of the fat is being cut, and that basically everything they're cutting is, basically equivalent to, condoms to Gaza or whatever.
Yes.
Whether or not that's actually real, that's the equivalent of everything they're cutting, that it's, it's just waste and it's not needed, and we'll see whether kind of those independents in the middle end up agreeing with them.
Let me pivot away from the executive branch and into the legislative branch. Obviously, there's going to be a lot that we'll probably see this week.
Legislative branch. I
know, right? There's going to be a lot that we're going to see this week in terms of whether or not the Senate or the House is going to run this reconciliation package. I tend to think it's going to have to be the House one way or another, because no matter what Lindsey Graham wants to pass out of the Senate, it has to pass the House anyway. And I think that that's going to be a problem no matter what. That being said, I want to focus on the Democrats for a second, because there is something that I have not heard in my lifetime, which means assuredly you probably haven't heard it in your lifetime. That is Democrats kind of under the radar, only like the sickos like me and you are paying attention to it, talking about the idea of a shutdown. They have been very good about blaming every shutdown on the Republicans, whether or not they control the House, the Senate, and the presidency, or the Republicans control it. No matter what, the Democrats have been very, very effective at turning anti-governmental messaging from the Republicans into ownership over any shutdown in any scenario. But now you do have, at least in terms of Democratic polling, a sizable portion of their voter base that is like, do something. Do something, do something, do something. And the only thing that you can really do when you are in the minority is be a roadblock. It appears that the Democrats would wind up being a roadblock for any kind of budget or funding thing anyway. So the only real question is, why not just go the whole 9 yards and say, yeah, we are going to shut down this totally illegal and out of control government because it is gone off the rails. That would be a change of pace. It'd be very curious to see whether or not they'll take that chance, because I think the reason why they have stayed away from shutdown messaging is because it's hilariously unpopular and you wind up paying a price for it down the road. But has that struck you, that Democrats are even talking about this like it struck me?
I mean, I guess one thing I will, I think, yes, I think you do have a point there. I do think part of it is just it's this genuinely difficult conundrum where, I think the dirty little secret, I think when most people think, most people don't probably think of government budgeting at
Nope.
all, but to the
Nope.
extent you might think of it, you probably think of a government shutdown or you think of
Hmm.
these fierce clashes over government spending. The reality is, once they kind of get that, usually there's maybe an initial fight out of the way, they get all their arguments out. Actually, it's one of the more bipartisan things that goes on,
Yes.
from year to year in the government because it has to be bipartisan, and generally people agree it has to happen. And so it is something that, there is a lot of good faith and trust between a lot of the appropriators on Capitol Hill. The people, who are on the appropriations committees, they've been doing this for decades. They've been hashing out these deals together. On the Senate, you have people like Patty Murray and Susan Collins. They are, they have been kind of negotiating partners for a long time. And I do think the reason why you suddenly see Democrats maybe talking about the need for a shutdown is because, how do you hash out a bipartisan deal on government spending in an environment where you're not sure if the president will follow that deal, where you do have, members of the executive branch openly saying, the Congress can pass whatever appropriations package they want. That's a ceiling of how much the executive branch has to spend, not a floor. We don't
Yeah.
have to kind of spend that much. And so I think it is kind of a real political conundrum for the Democrats because, government shutdowns historically, it never helps to
Nope.
spark a government shutdown. You're never the winner when you're the one that causes it. And then on the other hand,
Or if you take credit for it. I mean, at the end of the day, every government shutdown is a bipartisan failure. The question is who is most effective at pointing fingers. And the Democrats have wisely, in my opinion, always taken advantage of the fact that there are members of the Republican constituency who are out and out saying, I'm happy that the government is being shut down. And they say, look, oh my God, they admit it. And that's that. This would be a change in pace to say we need to stop it because we do not know what's happening.
And I think for that reason, it would be reflected as it being their fault, which I do think would be
Yes.
politically harmful. But also, it would be like, how are you, Patty Murray, kind of sitting down with Susan Collins, agreeing to a deal like this if you're not even sure that it'll ever be followed? It does genuinely. The fact that impoundment is back on the table, I do think throws the whole appropriations process into an uncertainty that we haven't had since the Nixon era. And so that would be my answer to your question. That I do think you're right that it's a change of pace of where Democrats are coming from, but it's also a change of pace from appropriations deals generally being, we all agree that they have to happen eventually, and we all kind of agree that they'll be followed. I'll say, if you want my kind of hot shutdown take on this,
Oh, yeah, I do.
I think on a lot of different matters, people are underestimating the extent to which Donald Trump could take the model that he's already using the executive branch of the kind of move fast and break things and try to apply it to the legislative branch of trying to implement, I think, changes to a lot of the general kind of rules and procedures that we kind of just take for granted. I think one of them is in the reconciliation process. I think a lot of people are not taking seriously enough the possibility that they could really try to just throw out the Byrd rule and try to do a lot more through reconciliation than is typically allowed. But in this context, I think it's also worth noting that government shutdowns are not even something that technically come from the legislative branch. The only reason we have government shutdowns are a memo by Benjamin Civiletti, who was Attorney General under Jimmy Carter, who basically reinterpreted the law to say that when kind of government appropriations lapse, until the Carter era, when government appropriations lapsed, nothing would change. Funding levels wouldn't go up, but the government would kind of just continue to operate as though there was, now as though there's a continuing resolution in place, would kind of be the equivalent of how we do it in the modern era. Benjamin Civiletti, as kind of a way to kind of force, lawmakers to actually
get stuff done.
He signed this memo in the Carter era saying, no, when appropriations lapse, the government will shut down. All non-essential operations will end. You must kind of be forced to the table. You must actually sign new appropriations bills or nothing will happen. All it would take is a new memo from Pam Bondi to say, actually, that's not how I interpret the Anti-Deficiency Act. That's not how I interpret, Article 1 of the Constitution. Actually, when appropriations lapse, we just keep going. Or at the very least, maybe they do a partial shutdown to still try to blame things on the Democrats, but have a very different definition of what is essential and what is non-essential, and completely try to, I just think there's the potential here for the Trump administration to completely reinterpret what it even means to have a funding lapse and eventually keep trying to spend money in contravention of there not being any appropriations bills, which, by the way, they might be on fairly firm legal footing to do, considering it was only an attorney general memo in the first place that
has started all this. All right, number one, that's fascinating. I'm so excited that you brought that up because I had no idea that was the case of why. Yeah, why that's the case. Politically, I don't know why the Republicans would do anything other than let the Democrats sit in a shutdown for as long as they wanted to sit in a shutdown. Like that, when you look at Republicans have what? Once the special elections happen in Florida, 4 votes in the House, which is insane. They'll have 1 more than the Senate, which is nuts. Right now, they have less than the Senate. If we assume that we live in a totally gerrymandered map and that ultimately we are only ever talking about 40 seats maybe in any House election every 2 years, and so we are gone are the days of 30-seat majorities, gone are like everybody is going to have a 5 to 15-seat majority from here until something else happens, right? Then, yeah, I would want to let the Democrats shut the government down, and then I would message everybody in those swing districts that think shutdowns are poison to say the Democrats did this. That would be manna from heaven for them.
I think one thing that looks good for the Republicans is to say the Democrats shut the government down. But also maybe even better message is the Democrats shut the government down, and Donald Trump, the very
we didn't care,
willing to do things that no other president do, reopened it.
Yeah.
And then not only are the Democrats,
they closed it, we reopened it. Yeah.
Exactly. Not only the Democrats are the enemies, or not only are Democrats the anti-heroes, but Republicans are the heroes of this story. Rather than looking weak and kind of being like the Democrats shut the government down, and also Donald Trump, who we've been messaging all this time, is all powerful and do whatever he wants, and we just let it happen because the Democrats kind of ran right over us. Like, in one hand, you're right, I think traditionally, according to traditional political messaging, that's helpful, but it also really runs counter to how
the MAGA argument. Yeah.
As this who Democrats could never run over us. He says, no, they tried to shut it down, we're not letting it happen. Or at the very least, we're not letting it happen to the full extent such that we're keeping, whatever certain kind of arms of the government, we're keeping our food inspections running, or we're keeping, certain things that they deem that have traditionally been deemed non-essential, but they are deeming, still going to deem essential to show that the Democrats are trying to shut the government down, but we won't let you feel the effects of that.
Yeah.
I think could also be a fairly potent political message in its own way. You kind of eat your cake, you kind of have your cake and eat it too. Both blame the Democrats on the shutdown, but then not actually letting people feel the effects of the shutdown and getting to seem like the hero.
It very much fits into the ethos of this administration, which is you can just do things.
Yeah, exactly.
That is kind of the way. Whether or not you agree with the things that they are doing, they are certainly just doing them. Yeah. And you, dear listener and viewer, can subscribe to Wake Up to Politics, a fantastic newsletter that has insights like the one that you just heard out of Gabe's mouth, that indeed shutdowns are just something that Pam Bondi could, with a stroke of a pen, say, go away forever. Where can people find Wake Up to Politics?
Find it at wakeuptopolitics.com.
Just that easy. Just that simple. Thank you so much, Gabe.
Thank you, Justin. Always good to talk with you.
This is your update, brought to you by TakePoliticsSeriously.com. If you want to support this show, only one place to do it, TakePoliticsSeriously.com. 2 bonus episodes each and every week on Take Politics Seriously. And, with the fire hose, it's worth it. We're delivering good product these days. I'm feeling very good about the return on investment for anybody who kicks in for $3 measly a week, billed as 12 monthly, or just go ahead and rip the Band-Aid off, dude. Get on in for a year's worth of this show, $99 for the year. Again, 4 bonus episodes. I think 150 episodes total for less than $1 an episode. That's what you're supporting the show for. Thank you very much for doing it. Let's go ahead and get into some of the stories that we didn't get a chance to talk about. Speaking of the Ukraine-Russia peace deal, Vladimir Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, canceled his planned visit to Saudi Arabia, originally scheduled for Wednesday. This decision comes in response to the U.S.-Russia negotiating taking place in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, concerning the war in Ukraine, for which Zelensky says he was excluded. President Zelensky emphasized that the decisions about ending the war cannot be made without Ukrainians' involvement. He does plan to reschedule his official visit to Saudi Arabia for March 10th. Zelensky in Europe's in a weird place because the people driving the boat on this was the U.S. State Department under Joe Biden. And they ain't walking through that door. Ben Rhodes isn't walking through that door. Okay? Jake Sullivan is not walking through that door. This is up to them now in terms of the money and the direction. And, you know, the money and strategy of the State Department was unlimited money-wise. And the point of this war was to rub Ukraine against the Russian military to show its weaknesses and to degrade its capacity. That was it. That ain't happening anymore. There is going to be a deal, and Zelensky is now going to go to Europe and say, hey, if you guys are mad about this, you can go ahead and pay us money. At which point, Europe's going to have to wonder, how much do we care about Ukraine? What can we offer to Ukraine? And, you know, that's the crux of what is happening right now with the Trump administration's dealings with Ukraine, which is, hey, let's get into bed together from a financial perspective. Let's get in on some of those mineral rights because we will defend you if we are making money above board. If we are not making money above board, then it's going to be harder just to say, oh, we will always promise to give you weapons because there's only so much that the U.S. can do right now, $34 trillion in debt. We'll see. We'll see. Mayor Eric Adams' administration is in turmoil after 4 top deputy mayors announced their intent to resign over his handling of immigration. First Deputy Mayor Maria Torres Springer, Deputy Mayor for Health and Human Services Ann Williams Isom, Deputy Mayor for Operations Mira Joshi, and Deputy Mayor for Public Safety Chauncey Parker have all announced that they're going to step down. The resignations follow a tense meeting at Gracie Mansion, where officials reportedly expressed concerns that Adams is aligning himself with President Donald Trump. The Justice Department recently dropped corruption charges against Adams, sparking accusation of a quid pro quo, which his attorney denies. Amid growing calls for his resignation, Adams defended his record at a Brooklyn church event, dismissing critics and warning against potential successors. Democratic rivals argue the departure signaled dysfunction, with some pushing for a committee to assess Adams' ability to govern. Governor Kathy Hochul has yet to act, but pressure is mounting as the mayor prepares for a re-election this year. With the primary happening in June, we will be on the ground in New York, in what is shaping up to be a very, very, very interesting primary, because we don't even know if Eric Adams is going to be in it. We don't know if Eric Adams is going to be the mayor, as Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, seems like she might remove him. I mean, it's one thing to pressure somebody to resign. It's another to remove them. Now, I don't want to get into too much of the partisan messaging here, but if your argument is that you are the party of democracy and there's an election this year, then why are you removing the guy? Let the people speak. Especially considering the funniest part about this is that it almost assuredly clears the way for the last person who got run out of his position in New York State, Andrew Cuomo, to become the mayor of New York City. He got ran out of the governor's mansion. That's why Hochul's there now. It's going to be interesting. I hope Adam stays in because now he's openly talking with Tom Homan, the immigration deportation czar, right? Lot going on. And finally, this one's fascinating. Elon Musk hinted on Monday at investigating Fort Knox, home of the United States gold reserves. Looking for the gold at Fort Knox, he posted on X, sharing a message from Senator Mike Lee, who was denied access to the facility. Musk questioned whether the gold was still there, prompting Senator Rand Paul to call for transparency. Paul told Fox News that auditing Fort Knox would highlight the gold's value and roles in the dollar stability. Fort Knox, allegedly, holds over 147 million troy ounces of gold and has restricted access since 1974. The facility may now face scrutiny from Donald Trump's Department of Government Efficiency. Say what you will about Donald Trump, but he has a knack for finding stories that cut through the noise. If he wants to prove government corruption being held under your nose or being executed under your nose, finding out that Fort Knox is empty might blow everything else out of the water. Like, there's nothing that is woven into the American psyche like the gold in Fort Knox. Locked up like Fort Knox. This is a part of American culture. If it's not there, whew, that'll be something. That'll be it for our update. Again, brought to you by TakePoliticsSeriously.com. That's our Substack. That's where you get our bonus episodes. But also, I want to thank everybody because we put out a survey over the weekend. You can head on over to TakePoliticsSeriously.com if you want to take it. A lot of you have. In fact, more than ever have taken the survey. And it's been very illuminating. It's been very helpful. It takes less than 5 minutes and is just good to give me a sense of what you guys like, what you guys don't like, who you want to hear more of, who you want to hear less of. It's just good. It's just a good way for me to just keep in touch. Just keep in touch with you guys. So head on over there and take that. I believe the post is titled, How Will We Know Who We Are If Nobody Tells Us? And a little poetic for a Saturday when I sent it. Anyway, TakePoliticsSeriously.com. $3 a week, 2 bonus episodes, or just get on in at the $99 annual package. What are you waiting for? You think the news is going to slow down in the next year, leading into midterms? Come on. Jeez Louise. Here's John Teasdale. Joining us live here in studio is an entrepreneur, a man about the world, and my co-creator on the Contender card game, Mr. John Teasdale. How you doing, buddy?
Good, Justin. How are you?
Well, we had Gabe Fleischer, who is a recent college graduate, wunderkind, a political junkie, somebody that is a microscopically obsessed about politics. You are, in our episode here, exploring perspective, kind of the opposite.
Okay.
You have been around the world for how long? 2 years now? 2.5 years?
3.
3 years.
Yeah,
and
3
where
years.
And where were you? Get up a little bit closer on that mic.
Sure. I've been all over. I did a full circle of the globe, and then for the most of the time, I settled in Bali, Indonesia, which was the best place
The best of all the places. Of all the places, that was the best. So you were mostly in Bali through the 2024 election, right?
Yeah, the whole thing.
Now, Bali is certainly not. You're not like in like deep Indonesia when you're in Bali. There's a pretty hefty Western influence.
Yeah,
right?
Vibrant expat community. It's not what people who haven't been tend to imagine it is, which is
What would that be?
Well, you tend to imagine like island paradise, like surfing, like very laid back, easy lifestyle. But it's become much more of a like metropolitan, like fancy area where you could live the life of like being really, really rich in New York. but
For not a lot of
when
money.
you're not really, really rich.
Yeah. You just
Yeah.
have to be in Bali.
Yeah, you're just there.
Yeah.
Right. So lots of expats from everywhere.
Yeah.
Like everyone goes. Like Russians are there, Ukrainians are there, Saudis are there, Chinese are there, Americans are there, Australians, a ton of Australians are there.
Well, it's not that far, right?
From Australia?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Arnar.
Oh, no.
Arnar.
No.
How much Western news do you get? Like if you are just living your regular life, so, you were out doing, snorkeling, scuba diving, you're going to the gym, you're getting, going to restaurants. Like how much do you see of Western news just in general?
Well, I first realized how little of Western news that I was seeing when the Queen died.
Okay.
And I realized it was the first news that I had gotten from the West.
Yeah.
Since I had settled there. And that's when I was like, oh, wow, I seriously have no idea. Like coming from living here where the news is all anyone talks about all day, every day.
Yeah.
Like who's saying what to who's threatening what. It's not even about what's happening anymore. It's just about who's saying things.
Yeah.
And then that makes the news. And then that becomes what everyone's talking about.
And that is just non-existent.
Non-existent.
And were you a big social media guy? I know that you've gone kind of in and out on social media in general, but at this point through the election, what social media are you consuming?
I have an Instagram.
Yeah.
And that's it.
And so most of your Instagram is comprised of non-news things?
Yeah, it's mostly funny songs. Funny songs and memes. Yeah.
And so like that does not, I mean, like maybe in a gigantic political moment, somebody will do a funny song or a meme about
Yeah,
a thing,
like
but
the stand-up comedy sometimes when it references like modern events. So my Reels page is like stand-up comedians.
Yeah.
Like funny meme songs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's mostly it. And like, podcast clips. But mostly about relationships.
Yeah.
And so it very rarely does anything break through with the news. And if it does, it's usually like a really, really big event.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, just to give people a sense of your natural inclination for this, before you were in Bali or just really out of the country in general, I would describe you as somebody who is pretty politically engaged. Like you were in the mix, like you knew, like you were Bay Area political engaged,
Yeah.
which is like higher than the average.
Yeah. You absorb it by osmosis.
Yes.
Like you're living.
Just to know what everybody is talking about, you need to know certain names that other people in general probably wouldn't know.
Exactly. And then you have to get mad about all the right stuff. And like all of the media that you would be consuming here normally is like, it's like something from Saturday Night Live or something that makes references, cultural references.
To a thing that happened 2 days ago that was in the minutia of the political world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All of the small things. Plus, I got really, really dialed into politics and what was going on when we were working together on
the Contender. Yeah.
And that's literally all we were doing was looking at every little thing that anyone said to see how relevant it was to the game.
Yeah. Well,
And that kind of carried through.
For folks that are not aware, the Contender, which is the game of presidential debate, involves you can play with you and your friends. It's a fun party game. You play these cards back and forth in a simulated debate, and they are all either verbatim or derived from real quotes that were made throughout either a campaign or a actual stump speech from a candidate. And so we have every election represented in the main box, and then although it was 2 elections ago, so we were missing 2020 and 2024, but certainly for 2016 when we made the game, that was a big thing for us. And like we went back and watched between the two of us.
Yeah.
We watched every presidential debate and I believe vice presidential debate too.
And read the transcripts to the ones that weren't recorded.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was quite a a pull of information. But then, that carried over, and then, we entered into this heightened sense of.
Oh yeah, because then Donald Trump wins, and
then
the
Donald
Bay
Trump
Area
won.
goes
The Bay Area went nuts.
insane.
And then all day, every day was just about, like, the only news was what was Donald Trump saying at any point. What was he tweeting?
Yeah.
What was he threatening to do? Like the stuff that he actually did. I don't even know what he did during the first term. I just know all the weird stuff that he was threatening to do.
Like, I remember you were moving out of an apartment when the Mueller report dropped. I remember I read the Mueller report while I was helping you move.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, John, we got to stop moving because I need to read the Mueller. And I'm just like scanning for like, I'm like, oh, this kind of doesn't seem like there's a lot in here.
Yeah.
I'm just like, wait, like, in the next page, yeah.
But I knew what everyone was saying for months leading up to that. I knew every time anyone made a hint about the Mueller report. And then
Like, he's going to jail tomorrow.
And then I don't remember what was in it.
Yeah. Because, it was the stuff that was the most damning was the like evasion of the investigation. But also it's like when the underlying facts of why
it's like, you're resisting arrest. You're resisting arrest. What are you arresting me for? Resisting arrest.
Being a silly boy. So that's where you were. Then you go off on this international journey. What did you know of the 2024 election? Like chronologically, from the earliest thing that you remember about what was happening, aside from, maybe just even like being reminded that it was happening.
I'd say the main thing was, so I knew Trump was running.
Yeah.
I knew he was running again. And then the next piece of news that I got was somebody shot at him.
Wow. So it was just, he's running.
Yeah.
Skip the entire primaries.
Blink over.
Yeah. And so we are like we're into, summer, dead of summer.
Yeah.
And he gets shot, and that makes its way. So how do you hear about that? Is that just like whispers around the gym, or like does that come across your social media?
That was, so I was actually like sitting in a cafe, and another American guy, I overheard a conversation between him and another American guy.
Yeah.
Talking about it. And basically it was like, wait.
Hit him with a...
I was like,
how do you do, fellow Yanks? Fill me in.
Excuse me, what did you say? And like at that point, like, all they knew, it was like in the moment, right? So we knew he got rushed away. We didn't know how bad it was. We didn't know if it was like, because all I heard was that he got shot. I didn't know that it was like a graze and that he stood up afterwards and was like, USA.
Yeah.
Brief, look in afterwards. And the guy I was sitting with was just like, I predicted this would happen.
Oh, Jesus.
And he pulled out his like notes for like the year. And he's like, this is what I think is going to happen this year. And then one of the things was Donald Trump wins the election after surviving an assassination attempt.
Jeez Louise.
Yeah. And I was just like, huh.
Weird people go to Bali.
Maybe he'll win then.
Yeah.
So after that, I heard that.
Well, here, let me stop you here.
Set some context.
What is the mood? All I know is that I haven't talked to a bunch of people in like Alabama that talk about their yearly trips to Bali. I know a lot of people in the Bay Area that talked about their yearly trips to Bali, which makes me assume that at least in the American Western influence, it's probably more of a liberal influence than it would be a conservative influence. But I don't know. How would you describe the if Bali had a primary,
the general political leadings,
and it could vote either Republican or Democrat, what would it vote for?
It would go to Trump in a landslide.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
The people who, I hang out mostly the expats, right? I don't hang out with like the people who are just coming in and out for vacation.
Yeah.
Not so much. The people who are expats who moved there to live there long term generally want more freedom, more independence, less socialism. Like they want more, like,
gotcha. Let me do my own thing.
Leave me alone.
A libertarian bent
There's
to
definitely
the Bali expats.
definitely a libertarian bent to the Bali expats.
And so they would vote. That would be a Trump vote.
Yeah, the amount of conversations I've heard about how much they don't like people don't like Joe Biden, like don't like Taylor Swift.
Really?
Like don't like It's like that whole MAGA like the MAGA like culture. Like I overhear those conversations more than I overhear like, oh no, he's destroying democracy.
Yeah.
You know.
I would imagine also that you would get a little bit of the like, did you hear much about like the Bobby Kennedy Jr., like the Make America Healthy Again or any of that kind of stuff?
So yeah, actually,
I would imagine that probably there's like a health freak element to Bali.
The health stuff, I'm in those communities. Like I'm training to become a natural health practitioner. And in my final exams right now. So that definitely broke through. Like that appointment and then I guess the confirmation. I don't know if that happened or not. All right.
In, yeah.
So he made it in, but that whole
So now that's when that's
now
to you.
That news
you are witnessing it right now.
Justin Young, my primary source of political news.
There we go.
Has just given me
breaking news here for Bali.
So yeah, like we were pretty excited about that. Just as a general idea.
But it sounds like that was like a supercharging. There was already a pump primed with that crowd. They'd probably vote for Donald Trump no matter what. But then it's like, RFK on board. And
so that was those conversations about him like didn't include Donald Trump. It was just like, oh, like this guy would be great. Like, like almost divorced from any sentiment about Donald Trump as a person. It was just talking about how much people were excited to see what he did.
Yeah.
With
Bobby Kennedy.
medicine. Yeah.
All right. So he gets shot.
Mm-hmm.
I know we had a conversation and you were like, he's going to win. There's zero chance that a guy who gets shot.
Right. I called my mom and then I called you.
Yeah. like he got shot. Like he's gonna win. And it's one of those things that I did kind of internalize because I knew that you were in a rare position to kind of see a very macro view of things. And in a weird way, you were probably closer to the average voter in Pennsylvania.
Oh, definitely.
Than I was.
Right.
Because I'm like so in the weeds on like, why would they not do a stronger ad buy in Pennsylvania in the last 4 weeks? It's like that's like the thing stuff that I'm looking at is people like freaking out and like having an aneurysm because of stuff like that. But you're like, man get shot, man stand up, so man become president.
I think my main point
matters.
I think my main point was all of the moral weight that the Democrats had from January 6th evaporated instantly the moment somebody tried to shoot him. And it didn't matter who tried to shoot him, but the fact that like the Democrats were running so hard on January 6th for so long. And like, I think that did resonate with a lot of people for a long time. But then the moment someone took a shot at him, then for anyone who would have been swayed by January 6th was just immediately like, nope, we're on the side of the guy who got shot now.
At the very least, it levels it out. It zeroes it out.
Yeah.
If not, makes him far more sympathetic because... Like when you see him get up,
when you stand up, when you saw it afterwards,
blood on his face,
and he stood up and he had blood on his face, and he went USA. I was like,
fight.
How does that guy
save me the emails, MAGA? It was fight.
Yeah. I think this whole segment is about how little I'm aware of what's going on.
Exactly.
So don't email me either. But yeah, it's like fight, and how does that guy not win? Well, because I feel like the next thing that I found out about was when Biden dropped out of the race.
Yeah.
And so if all you know about the election is somebody shot at this guy and then he handled it like a champ. He handled it like, Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah.
Like we've written political fan fiction about how rad Teddy Roosevelt was.
Yes.
For like getting shot and then finishing his speech,
We did political Fortnite, right? Or no, it was, I guess.
PUBG, yeah.
PUBG,
it was the
same thing.
Same kind of idea.
Yeah. if all the presidents were dropped on an island, who would win? And,
Yeah.
and Teddy does well. Teddy goes deep.
Yeah. No spoilers.
No spoilers. Mostly because I don't remember.
I remember.
Who wins?
No spoilers.
All right.
We can't spoil it.
Well, I mean, tell people where to get it.
I don't remember.
Then spoil it.
Teddy Roosevelt wins.
Teddy wins.
Yeah, but when all you know about the election is that, and like, oh, Biden dropped out, was replaced with Kamala, who did so bad in the previous election.
Yeah.
That like she was one of the first ones out.
Yep.
I was just like, yeah, no, there's no way. Like,
that was that.
I told I called my mom, and she was all excited about how like young and vibrant like Kamala was in comparison to Joe Biden, and I was like, it's made up. Like people are just psyched that to have somebody else, but like no one's really excited about her, because if they were, they would have been excited about her last time, and they weren't. Yeah. And so I was like, just prepare yourself, because my mom really didn't want Trump to win.
Yeah.
And so she's just prepare yourself. Like, it's going to be Trump.
It is one of those things when you look back at it, you're like, oh, he gets shot. He's more popular than ever.
Yeah.
And then his opponent drops out because he has no shot at winning.
Yeah.
It's like, we're not really dealing with a position of strength.
Yeah.
Right. And then it's like, all right, it would be dependent on Kamala like overperforming.
But massively overperforming.
Yeah. But like you said, it's like, well, if she was going to overperform, she probably would have shown something.
She would have done better than Buttigieg.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So then how did you experience the election itself, election day?
So like election day,
is that still something that people are like dialed in on? Like if all the rest of it is just sort of stuff that floats in and out and only the most bold-faced headlines make their way across the Pacific, is election day still something where people are like, oh, okay, here we go, it's election day? Or is you just get out of the waves and you're like, oh, Trump's president. It's like funny.
So this is where I start to lose a little bit of my like normal person, because it turns out I have a very good friend who runs an election day live stream.
Gotcha.
And it was very enjoyable.
Gotcha. So you watched our live stream.
I watched the live stream. Yeah. And then I think because it was going to be one of those things that like dragged on, and so I didn't stay to the end. But I was like, okay, yeah, that's what I thought.
As soon as it started getting.
Yeah.
Like,
and then I woke up the next day and I called my mom and I was like, oh, I'm sorry. And she's like, oh, there's still a chance. I was like, okay.
There's not.
Well, I'll call again tomorrow. It's like, you feeling okay? And she's just like, no.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because when I picked you up from the airport, we were talking about kind of the vibes of it. And my sense is here compared to, and granted, again, we got a bit of a skewed perspective because we were in the Bay Area where people were like maximally freaking out.
Definitely.
Like hair on fire freaking out. But I would say that there's still a contingency of like people that are as apocalyptic as they were back in 2017. But I don't know if it's widespread in the same way. Like, I don't know if you could get, like, what was like that first women's march?
It would be
Oakland and San Francisco both had like something ridiculous, like 50,000 people or something that like came out for like those first women's marches.
Yeah.
I don't know if you could do that now.
That's a funny thing because neither of us are living in the Bay Area now.
No.
And like, I definitely, I feel like I started freaking out as well. Just, when you're surrounded by people who are freaking out, you don't really have, like, I feel like you kind of get freaked out too.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, there was a lot of like, is this the end? Like, was Nostradamus right? Like,
oh, I forgot Nostradamus. And then there was the book that said that there was like a time travel thing.
All
of written by Barron or whatever.
Yeah, all of the like everything bad I've ever said about astrology. I started to be like, maybe there's something to this.
Yeah.
But But this time around, I didn't know because I asked you about it when I got here, which was like this time around when he won, I was just like, all right, well, let's see how it goes.
Yeah.
And I wanted to know if that was like kind of the general sense of like the people who, voted Kamala but weren't among the like freaked out class.
I mean, it seems like it. We talked to Gabe Fleischer earlier in this episode and pointed out that his approval rating is above 50, which it has never been before. And if you consider that like 40% of the country thinks he's a criminal rapist, Russian stooge.
At least enough to check a box on
and another 40%
survey.
believe that he is an untouchable god that was literally spared by his creator so he could bring about, the Lord's will. Then you're really dealing with 20% in the middle. And like so far that 20%, regardless of who they voted for, seems to be holding at least in his direction currently. History would say that would fade, but also history would say that he's never been that popular ever.
Yeah.
So we don't know. I do know that like right now it does appear that like the people that are most freaked out, the people that are most dialed in are still dialed in. They still have the opinions that they had 2017 style, but it's the foot soldiers. The generals are still ready to go to war as much as possible. It's the foot soldiers that I think have checked out a little bit on the left.
Yeah, that seems to be the case, which is interesting because like even I always assumed that it was just because, when I got back, that's when I found out about all of the like, the daily kind of jibber jabber, like the, let's annex Canada kind of statements. Yeah. Because before that, I only really saw the things that actually happened.
Yeah.
And the whole like conversation, like all the threats and all the everything, like that didn't make it through at all.
Yeah.
And so I always thought it was because, I wasn't being exposed directly to that constantly, which is why I was just like, oh, okay, well, let's see what happens. But it seems like there could be something else. Either more people are checked out or something. I don't know.
Well, we'll all find out together. Teasdale, where can people find you?
They can't.
They can't. No, you're not going to give out your Instagram?
No.
Okay. You can buy The Contender though. The Contender's on Amazon, and you can do that. There we go. Don't defile John's Instagram. All right. Thanks, man.
Cheers.
And that'll wrap it up for us today. Politics. My name is Justin Robert Young. This was done for Dog and Pony Show Audio in Austin, Texas. You want to send me an email, it is theyoungamerican@gmail.com. Of course, you can hit us with a one-time donation, paypal.me/payjury. Venmo is Justin-Young-20, and Cash App is PX3 Cash. Send me anything you'd like in the mail. Post Office Box 153184, Austin, Texas 78715. But of course, if you want the show to continue, if you want my darling little daughter to continue to have food on the table, you got to go to takepoliticsseriously.com. Support us for $3 a week. Billed is $12 monthly, and get us at the $99 annual plan. Come on, guys. 2 bonus episodes each and every week, and we do not ever skimp on those. Even when we cut down the free episodes, we never skip on a bonus episode. Rain, shine, holiday, or no, I am there for you. But if you want your name read on the show, there's only one place to do it, and that is at the Titanic founding tier. L3PO, Peepaw, Scott, Middle-Aged Mike, Tom, Sarah Jeannie, Jeremy, Pro Idiot, Chiller Tomatoes. Oh yeah, it's Adam, Neil, AB Puppy, Dr. Whiskey, Michael, Fat Tony's PJs from New York, Will, The Borge B, Matthew, Matt, Andrew, Edwin, Sam, Andrew, Phil, Edison, Devon, Paul, a dog named Truckers, Gloria, my mom, Jerry, Trucker, John, Berkeley Steven, and Zombie Doc. You want your name read on the show? You want to join these beautiful people? Only one place to do it. TakePoliticsSeriously.com. Sign up at that founding tier. Get your name read on the show. And by the way, just get that Substack app. Whether or not you're a paying member. If you are on the team, man, you need that Substack app. We got a great chat. Yeah, it's just a fun community, man. I really love the tools that they built. Happy to be on Team Substack. On the next free edition of the program on Friday, we are joined by two of our favorite voices, Kevin Ryan to talk about the vibes, and Evan Scrimshaw to talk about why Canada hates us and the Canadian elections. And we get into a little just sicko conversation about handicapping the midterms. But that'll be Friday. Till then, this is your old pal Justin Robert Young saying, some shows talk about politics, others talk about politics, and still more discuss politics. But this is the only show that dares discuss. Oh, 3.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.
Dog and Pony Show audio.